right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Why don't you come up sometime, see me?
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Hi, Wendy here. Before we start off our episode today, I want to remind everybody to check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Also, please leave a rating or comment on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. You can find us on social media by simply searching Silver Screen Time Machine, and please make sure you follow our podcast, Silver Screen Time Machine, anywhere you get your podcast. Thank you, and enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome again to Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy's Classic Film Review. And today we have a guest, Carl. Carl, hello, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, Wendy.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a filmmaker. I work actually in this building for PCTV. I've traveled around the world with a camera, made a few films, made a couple documentaries, had one on Netflix, and I'm a film buff.
Awesome. So you are well-versed to speak in film, and you chose today's film, which we are going to get in our time machine. And we are going to go back to 1961, and we are going to talk about...
We're going to talk about La Dolce Vita.
La Dolce Vita. Awesome. I'm a humongous Fellini fan. I'm assuming you are as well.
I am.
So a couple things to start off with. This film won an Oscar for Best Costume Design, Black and White. Now we're going to have a lot of complicated Italian names that I'm not going to be able to say.
I can give it a try.
Okay, Piero Giardi, would you say?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Good.
And so that he is the fellow that won the Oscar. He actually was also nominated for Best Art Direction Set for Black and White as well in this film. It's not very common, at least maybe it's a little different in Italian film, but in American film, you don't usually have the same costume designer and same set designer.
Right. And there were 12 nominations.
I was also nominated for Best Director, Best Writing, Story, and Screenplay. Both of those were for Federico Fellini, also a couple other fellows that he usually collaborated with. We can try their names too if you want.
Yeah.
Ennio
Ennio
Faliani. Oh, good.
Faliano.
And Tullio Pinello. Yeah, that one's a little bit easier. Federico Fellini was nominated for 12 Oscars in his life.
Oh,
Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And he sadly did not actually win any of those Oscars. He only wound up winning an honorary Oscar. Yeah, which is kind of to me like the, oh, here you go.
Yeah, we have to give you
Before
something.
Before you die, there you go.
We have to give you some kind of award.
Yeah, it just kills me because of all the beautiful work he's done.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about Fellini?
Yeah, well, Fellini actually, as I understand it, was kind of tied in World War II and tied in with the fascists in Italy. And he started out, he was doing caricatures and cartoons for Mussolini and the fascist dictator. He didn't want to be in the military. He considered himself apolitical, but he avoided the draft as much as he could and spent time in Northern Africa reporting on the war in Northern Africa.
Yeah, he was also a journalist.
He was a journalist, yes, yeah. And yeah, he spent some time making films, early films. He did neo-realism after the fascist dictator left. And
he was kind of a disciple of Rossellini to start out with.
Right.
And Rossellini was the big neo-realist director.
Right.
Do you find Fellini to be really neo-realist? I mean,
well, his early films were.
Yeah, I question this film, though.
No, this is not. This was the break from his neo-realism.
So let's talk about neorealism, just a real quick description, because neorealism to me is basically using location shots. You're getting people sort of after the war. You're showing the post-war depression, I suppose. You're showing almost real people, very few actors. That's definitely not the case in this particular film.
No, not at all.
So a little bit of a departure.
There is a certain vibe that is in this film that is somewhat realistic.
Yes.
There's a vibe in this film that is somewhat realistic, and it is part of his hand. But his development as a filmmaker came from watching Hollywood films and Golden Era films. So what you have is this fantasy overlying
Yes.
neo-realism.
Yes, but we do have a lot of these are sets. We're not shooting completely on location. We have sets here.
Oh, yeah.
Which is hence why Piero, or whatever his name was, got a nomination. But the thing I like about Fellini films, and you see in most Fellini films, at least his black and white period, are these sort of stark landscapes, these sort of buildings that are very plain, unornamented, run down even, locations, just very kind of stark.
I kind of think that there are two films that were made, and Citizen Kane was made, and basically Orson Welles showed what you could do with the camera. Then you had a bunch of films that followed where the stories were narrative and they were very straightforward. And then the second film happens, and it's La Dolce Vita, which is the heavy use of symbolism, camera movement, and you start to explore what film can really do. Basically, this film is seminal because it frees up filmmaking from this point on. Prior to this point, most films are done in a very narrative, straightforward storytelling manner. This is a collage of pieces put together that tell a story about society and through a man's collapse. So you get this evolution from traditional society, is what was going on in Italy post-World War II, into modernity in Italy, which is this sort of debauchery is going on. And you find this in the character Marcello Mastroianni plays, which he embodies the story. And he also is embodying the director's story because the director was a writer, as is Marcello, a writer in this film.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about this, the way this is set up. So they're basically, what you're going to have here is 7 episodes. It's all one film, but they're like 7 little,
That's right.
let's say, day. Well, technically they're days and nights. So, but they're 7 separate episodes, and you're going to have all different characters in these episodes. You're going to be introduced to characters out of the blue that you're not going to know any backstory on. You're not going to know anything about. You have a prologue, you have an intermezzo, which is like an intermission, I guess, and an epilogue. And it kind of can go through those. But the cinematographer on this film, Otello Martelli, he also did La Strada. He started out as a newsreel cameraman. He worked with a lot of neo-realistic directors. I think that's why you see the very documentary type looking cinematography in this particular film. And I thought the score, Nino Rota, famous for his Godfather score. He actually won an Oscar for The Godfather 2. He wasn't nominated for the original Godfather, but he had this thing where I guess he kept reusing music from his previous films, and they would not consider it original music. So they kicked him out of that nomination.
Yeah. The music is really diverse throughout the film.
Yeah,
and
it's interesting.
back to your point about the 7 different, the montages, the 7 different stories inside of the film. Some people say that it's the 7 deadly sins. Other people say, and interestingly enough, a lot of it was shot on the 7 hills of Rome, each section. So, there's theories behind it and how it was set up, but it's definitely 7 different stories, but they all come together.
Yeah. So let's go through the stories. Starting off with the beginning, obviously, you have this really interesting scene of this helicopter transporting this sort of Christ statue over, we don't know where it's going, it's just going over the town, which is pretty symbolic. Fellini was famous for using this sort of Roman Catholicism symbolism throughout his film. He had a very strange relationship with that religion. I think he equally hated and loved it. I think he idealized it and also despised it.
And what's funny is that initially when the film was released, the Catholic Church, it caused a big uproar. But then the Catholic Church finally got it, and they realized what it was truly about.
Yeah.
Which was the demise of this guy who was living this hedonistic life.
Yeah.
But at first they thought, oh my, this is terrible. And so they finally came around to it. But the opening scene with Christ and the helicopter, a lot of people forget there were 2 helicopters in that scene. And this is when we're introduced to the main character, Marcello, who's, I believe he tries to, there are women down below.
Yeah, see, this is the thing. You have this pure religious statue that they're transporting, and then all of a sudden you see these women in bikinis sort of, to me, symbolizing corruption. And he's much more interested in...
And he apparently is trying to get their attention.
Yep.
And
meanwhile, dangling this religious symbol, he's sitting there worried about trying to get the number of these women.
You don't know if the Christ figure being carried across Rome is blessing Rome or,
Just being
chastising Rome
Yeah.
for what is happening there.
You see it right off the bat, though, the symbolism of, and you get a good sense of his character, Marcello. It's sort of like this kind of guy. He's not really very forward. The girls don't give his number. And he does this all throughout this film. Every time something doesn't go his way, he just gives a little shrug.
Right.
Oh, well.
Right.
Like he just kind of floats along. He kind of drifts.
Well,
He's just a drifter through life.
And his character is doing a battle. And he's doing an internal battle, which it's interesting. All his sort of love interests manifest in different ways.
Yep.
And he's kind of a fickle guy. And it's the honesty. And also, too, it's a very European viewpoint of relationships and desire and how that manifests for men.
Yeah, so that's just the beginning. That's our little prologue. We get into episode 1. And many of these episodes start at a nightclub or a nightlife or something like that, probably like late in the evening, mid-evening, late evening. And they almost always wind up in the early morning of the day.
Right.
And throughout most of these episodes, what will happen is they'll be in a fun adventure to start, then there will be some sort of a crisis, and then everything will get resolved by the morning. That's usually how all these episodes go. So the first episode, he meets this lady, Madalena, played by Anuka Me, in a nightclub. And I thought it was really, before even that, when they shot from the Christ figure, the Christ statue, the religious figure, and then immediate to like almost this pagan-looking idol.
Yeah.
This person in a costume.
It's like kind of a send-up of a Thai Buddhist statue.
Yes, but in Rome, you would consider that almost like a pagan idol.
Yeah.
Keeps going back from traditional religion to modern debauchery, as you said.
Right.
And it keeps making that point back and forth. So anyhow, he meets this lady, Marcello. He meets this Madalena, who's this very rich lady. And she's kind of a good pair for him because she's also very nonchalant, also seems to be drifting through life, doesn't have any real purpose or emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And they wind up meeting these prostitutes and taking this one prostitute with them to her house where they wind up making love in her house.
One of the things that when you watch this film, though, is that you don't know if they actually made love.
Well,
you will assume that. And one of the things that's mentioned oftentimes in the film, in the dialogue, is sleep. And whether it's a literal translation or is it sleeping around? Is there something lost in translation here? He never once engages in sexual act, or it's not really shown in a way that you would say, well, yeah, they had sex, especially in that opening scene. I think they closed the door.
They do close the door, but I feel
and then he comes out with her.
Yeah.
And she looks like she had a decent night's sleep, but her hair is kind of messed up. So
I do think
we don't know.
Yeah, I think in that first episode they are represented. He says, do you want to make love here? And she says yes. So I do think in that first sequence.
Does she say yes?
Yes.
I don't know that she says yes, but
she asked him. He asked her, and
he asked her, and then I don't know that she said yes, but she's lying on the bed.
Yes.
But the bottom line is that the symbolism of where and what is going on in that basement of the prostitute's home and how there's a flood and water, that's kind of a real symbolism for he's either going down steps or up steps throughout the whole film. He's either rising or falling.
Yeah, I would agree with you on most of the episodes that I don't think he actually does do anything with the women. I do think the first one he does, because I think she comes into other episodes, and I think
she does.
Maybe he has more of a connection to this particular person than anybody else in the film. Regardless, the crisis point is going to come because now he has a girlfriend that lives with him. Her name is Emma, and he returns to find out that she's overdosed.
And he's engaged to her.
Yeah, and he has to rush her to the hospital. Which that hospital is just, again, very stark with these nuns and these very traditional looking hats. It just doesn't look like a hospital you would ever see. It's almost she's lying on just an autopsy table is what it looks like.
Yeah, it's very stark. And sometimes those things are done because of budget constraints. Sometimes they're intentional. And I'm sure somebody could find something on that scene because it is an interesting scene. Yeah. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it really looks like an autopsy table, which I don't know if that's like supposed to be, he did that on purpose, but This is the thing about Fellini is you can do a lot of your own interpreting because he leaves a lot of things open to the viewer's interpretation. So it's a nice thing about him. He makes you think. The good thing is it gets resolved. She does recover. And even though she's recovered, what's he doing? He's trying to call Magdalena.
Right. He's on the phone philandering.
Trying to call her, and she's asleep. She doesn't answer the phone, or she's passed out, whichever. So then we go on to our second day sequence, which this sequence is my favorite sequence. Because this is the sequence that has Sylvia come in. I guess she's supposed to be an American-Swedish actress played by
Anita Ekberg.
Anita Ekberg. Yes, who looks
Anita
so
Ekberg,
beautiful in this particular. She looks very beautiful here. But this is a very interesting sequence to me because I feel like this particular sequence is kind of making a statement on what Europe was fearing as the Americanization of Europe. Because she comes in and she has to go to this press conference. They say a lot of interesting things in this press conference. One of the things they ask her is, what does she think of neorealism?
Right.
Which I thought was really interesting.
That was.
He would throw that in there.
And the questions are kind of strange, aren't they?
They're very silly.
They are. They're very silly, which
is probably what movie actresses actually think
it's actually a send-up of paparazzi.
And this is sort of when you first start to see the paparazzi. In this scene, when she comes out of the airplane, there's all these. Well, you see it actually in the first scene too. I forgot to mention, but his friend is called paparazzo,
right.
And actually, that is apparently
that's where the word came from.
Yeah, and this actually, he is the one that started the actual phrase of paparazzi and the idea of paparazzi because they didn't have this sort of thing in a movie before this.
When she came off the plane, it's really great because they tell her to turn around and come back out again because they want to get the shot again. So she turns around, she goes in, she turns around, and she somehow pulls her cape up and she's dressed in black at that point. And then they say, take your glasses off. And she's like, no, I won't.
Yeah.
But it's really all about staging and contrivancy at this point.
And her clothing throughout is very symbolic of different things. She wears a lot of these long dresses and capes and flowing things. They wind up going to the press conference, and poor Emma is calling Marcello, trying to berate him and tell him to stay away from this lady, and he's not really doing anything at this point. But then they go to St. Peter's, I guess, and they go up the stairs to St. Peter's, and she flies up. And then in this particular scene in St. Peter's, she's dressed almost like a priest.
Yeah.
So it's very symbolic again.
She expects to see, is it David up there when she's looking out? It's really funny because she expects to see the statue of David.
Yeah.
And Marcello says, no, that's in Florence.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they do this, then they come back, and this is their night sequence where they are going to have a crisis occur. So they're going into this sort of party. They have a lot of these parties. So there's a little party where they're dancing. Now she has this fellow turn up, this boyfriend, I guess he is of hers, or ex-boyfriend. We don't really get the idea of exactly what his relationship is with her. His name in the film is Robert. He's played by Lex Barker, who was actually an American actor who played Tarzan in the 1950s.
Yes, he was Tarzan.
Yeah.
And they mention that in the film.
Yeah, but he's like sort of this drunken guy that maybe is her ex-boyfriend, her current boyfriend. We're not really sure, but he's very mad all the time and drunk. And she's doing this crazy thing where she's dancing in this crazy way and laughing. And the music in this scene I really enjoy, the score in this particular part.
Yeah, and now this is the Trevi Fountain scene, right?
We're not
there yet.
Yeah, we're not quite there.
Okay, we're getting there.
Yeah, another thing that is interesting here, like I say, the Americanization, there's a rock and roll group that comes in.
Yeah.
And this is kind of before rock and roll was even very popular, so it's kind of cutting edge there. And then also this other fellow comes in. I think his name is Frankie. But this fellow, to me, represents evil, bad. He almost looks like the devil. He's got that sort of like...
Right, the beard.
Yeah. And he comes in, and a lot of times Fellini characters have these strange shapes that they make with their bodies as they're coming in. I take him to be evil, corruption, bad. But then, they run off to this fountain, the Trevi Fountain. And, well, apparently this, as an aside, this shoot took like a week, and they had to go stand in this fountain that was rather chilly. And she's just wearing this little dress. I mean, it's flowing dress, but she's wearing a dress I don't even think her shoulders were bare. And she said that she went in the fountain, no problem. And she was in the fountain the whole time. And Marcello Mastroianni, he couldn't go in. He was so cold.
He had to wear a wetsuit.
He was wearing a wetsuit. He was wearing all these clothes, and he had to get drunk.
He drank,
Yeah, so they said
drank
he
a
was
bottle
actually
of vodka, apparently.
Yeah, they said he was actually drunk in the scene.
Yeah, that scene has been reappropriated. I think the most recent version of that scene is for a Peroni beer commercial.
Mm.
So it's one of the greatest scenes in film history.
It's very sensual too,
Yeah,
when she
it
goes in the
is.
water
Yeah,
and
and
she's,
It's really just the scene in the film, maybe too much even for the film. It's that big of a scene.
Yeah.
It might just blow a hole in the film
Yeah.
when you watch it. It's that great. And the Via Veneto is just up the Spanish Steps from the Trevi Fountain. And the Via Veneto is in one of the scenes also, but Fellini built it. Fellini built the Via Veneto for that scene.
the set.
Yeah, for the set. And he liked the set he built way more than the real Via Veneto. And the real Via Veneto is actually not bad.
I imagine it is. But she's kind of basically the whole time teasing him. I feel like it seems like she's going to do something with him, and then every time he tries, she kind of just blows him off.
Right. And I think that her character, the larger in life, goddess type woman, is an essential part of the whole story. Where these women are in his life, and each woman symbolizes some manufactured idea of the way some men view women.
Did you think it was sort of Marilyn Monroe-esque, the character?
I think it was. I think that was probably, a really important part of what Fellini was thinking, bringing in this Hollywood larger than life star, which would be Marilyn Monroe. And it was at the time like the most expensive film ever made in Italian history. And whether they could afford, who they could afford, why did they just get Marilyn to do it, right?
Well, I think it was more a symbolism than actually trying to show have her there.
Right.
I think it might not have even been. We're just speculating at this point.
True.
But it just reminded me. It reminded me of Marilyn Monroe.
One thing, though, you do have to look at it through the whole thing. If you start looking at that film symbolically, then it changes the film, and that's why it's an important film. Because prior to that, there wasn't a lot of symbolism going on in film. It was straight narrative film. And now you're getting into the psychoses of a person. And you're showing the psychological, you're using film to show psychological things that are going on. Visually, you're showing that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, and that's why it's so over the top, the whole film.
And then the final part, when we get to our sort of our conflict, is Robert is there. When they come back, he slaps her in the face, and then he basically punches Marcello. And that's, I think, supposed to be sort of, again, another take on America versus Europe, the bully American beating up on the European.
And it's also, too, a symbolic warning to Marcello that he needs to get his life together. He can't be running around womanizing every 15 feet. And when her boyfriend or whatever, whoever that guy is, Robert, he was in the car unconscious, and the paparazzi are literally climbing in the car with their cameras, and it's a great scene.
Yeah.
And one of them says he played Tarzan in a movie.
Yeah.
So it's kind of great.
Okay, so we're on to episode 3. Now we get introduced to Steiner. Now this is an interesting character, Steiner. As a matter of fact, I think it's interesting where we meet him, which is inside of a church. He's this very intellectual fellow. He goes up and plays the organ, and he plays Toccata and Fugue, which I think is also symbolic. You see that Marcello idolizes this guy. He's kind of a professional writer of some sort. And I think he just thinks this guy has this great life. He's his ideal. He finds this guy to be the ideal person. He wants to be just like him. And so, again, the Toccata and Fugue, people have said Toccata and Fugue can represent a storm as a piece of music, which I think ties into something later on when they go to his house. That's why I thought it was interesting. And also maybe trying to revert to a more traditional type thing.
And this is where, at this point, you start to pick up on the conflict that's going on for Marcello in the film. He's conflicted out because he's doing tabloid work, and he is a writer, and he wants to do more. He wants to be a novelist, and he wants to write a great book, and he's not doing it. And he's in the dregs, and he's chasing women. And it becomes apparent at that point. And there are a couple of lines that Steiner feeds him or tells him that how he has to start believing in himself and he can't really give him any advice on how to do this. And that's super high level stuff. I mean, to get him to try to get his life together. But
that's in a later episode. This one, he just talks to him in the church.
In the church.
Yeah. And then this is a very religious type one, because after he talks to him in the church, then the next thing that happens is somebody cited the Madonna, and they go to cover these two children that have cited the Madonna. And this is a very Fellini scene. I mean, you see this scene a lot in Fellini, these spiritual things that happen and these groups of people that come to try to partake of the spirituality. It's very Fellini here. He does this, I think, in a lot of his films. The thing that I thought is kind of an interesting contrast between artificial and spiritual here, because you have all these TV cameras and all these big TV lights, and then you have these people with candles. So it's like a very contrasting thing. And what did you think of this scene?
Well, and I think that that's part of the whole...
It's part of the whole thing. The modernization versus the
polemic of the whole film is this modernity versus traditional world. And how does that work out? And that's why Steiner is an important part of the film.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, very important.
Yeah, actually, Emma comes along on this one, and she sort of has a religious experience herself. She believes in this Madonna thing. She prays to the Madonna to make Marcello love her. That was her prayer. And they have this sort of sacred tree that supposedly the Madonna... The thing about it is that they have this sacred tree and everybody this is such a blessed site, but then it turns into a mob type scene where people just go ballistic and they tear and destroy this tree. There's this young person, this mother with a young child who brings her child to try to be healed, and they wind up trampling him to death.
Right. Yeah.
And I think it's very significant.
Yeah. And it's this end of religion.
Yeah.
It's a different time now.
Yeah. You're seeking religion, but you're destroying it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting statement by Fellini, in my opinion. Now we're on to the next episode, which is your episode. They gather in Steiner's house, and Marcello brings Emma again, and there's all these intellectual people saying all these intellectual things, and he's seen with his children and his wife. And again, Marcello just seems to admire this guy. He thinks he's so great. You get little senses that Steiner doesn't think his life is as great, or he's trying to convey to Marcello that it's not as great as you think.
Right. And Steiner is basically trying to somehow get Marcello to understand his life is his life and no one else's life. And that's okay. And at a certain point, Steiner has just as much of a nightmare on his hands as Marcello does on his. And that's sort of a Faustian nightmare going on there, where Steiner has achieved all these things. And they talk about how towering he is with all of this stuff. But
well, he says he feels very small.
Yeah. And we find out eventually that.
Yes.
Yeah.
An interesting thing I thought, now remember when we talked about toccata and fugue playing on the organ, the storm, but then he has, when he's playing some little pieces of philosophy, and then he's playing a storm on his little tape recorder. So he actually tape recorded a storm and all these nature sounds.
Right.
As if he can't appreciate nature, he has to record them and play them for himself.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to look at it. And Emma says birds. She hears the birds and she comments on the birds.
Yeah.
Okay. And you see during that scene, you see Marcello putting his head down, and Emma is out of place in that group.
Yes.
Really out of place in that group. And when she says birds, she's looked at as if you're not getting it. It's nature. It's not just the birds. This is an intellectual exercise.
Yes. She's looked down as being rather common and not as intellectual as
them.
them.
And they do that in such a subtle way in the film. You would never see it. It's not overt, but you see Marcello, he just drops his head. Because Marcello fancies himself or wants to be that way.
Yep.
He's stuck having to support himself.
Yeah. What he's doing, it makes no sense either, because he wants a life like Steiner's where he has this family and home, and yet he has a woman that wants to do this with him, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with her. He keeps her around because he's used to her. He's comfortable. And like we said, he's a drifter. He doesn't want to really push one way or the other. He just goes with the flow and doesn't really have any real direction. So he just sort of sticks with her because she's there. Meanwhile, she's offering this family life that he's looking for, and he's just rejecting her and going off with these women that it's not possible to do with.
Even though Steiner has a family life, he has an intellectual life too. And this is where Marcello doesn't. Marcello doesn't have that intellectual life. It's all movie stars and fluff. And so Steiner is perfection to him.
Yeah, and that will blow up in his face soon. But before that happens, we have our intermission or whatever, our intermissio, where he's just hanging out at the seaside resort or wherever he is. He's in a restaurant somewhere. And there's a young waitress there named Paulo, and she kind of represents innocence. At one point, he compares her to an angel. She's kind of just this innocent girl that he winds up casually meeting as he's sitting there. And there's really nothing that happens between them, but it's significant that he's around the presence of something that's innocent and good, rather than how the rest of the film, where he's kind of just always in this corrupt sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he's on the phone and he yells at her to turn the music off. And she pulls the plug on the jukebox. And then eventually he comes around to seeing her for what she really is, which is a fairly innocent person.
Yeah.
And I think that is.
And he lets her turn the music back on.
Yeah.
Supposedly the music she's playing is Perez Prado's Cha-Cha Patricia, which is, again, significant because it's going to reappear in the film later in a much different way. That's a very short scene, but it does have significance later on in the film.
It does.
And then we go on to the next episode, and Marcello winds up seeing his father, who apparently is some sort of a traveling salesman. And I do think there's a Fellini connection here. Fellini's father was kind of a traveling salesman, and it seems like Marcello didn't have much of a relationship with his father growing up. He was always out and so forth. So he's really welcoming the chance to be able to spend some time with his father, and they go to a nightclub and they meet a girl. The interesting thing in this particular thing is there's sort of, Fellini's a big fan of clowns. There's a clown in this particular sequence. Somewhere in most of his films, he has a clown or a circus type sequence somewhere, and he has that here. And I really, again, enjoy the music in this particular scene with the clowns, and it's very circusy sounding music, so it's really nice.
Marcello's lack of relationship with his father kind of comes out in that scene in an interesting way because he hasn't seen him all that often.
Right.
And his mom sends a letter to him. But what's interesting about it is that he thinks he's going to have a relationship with his father, and he finds out his father's not much different than him. Yeah. Which is
they're similar.
Real problem for Marcello. Yeah. It's a real problem at that point because now he has to face a lot more facts about
himself.
How he has problems.
Yeah. We have another crisis occur in this particular sequence that the father becomes ill, supposedly maybe has a mild heart attack or something. We're not really sure what. They don't say. But the lady, Fanny, that's the woman he sort of went off with. And again, they're very obscure. We don't know what went on with Fanny and the father, if they just hang out, whatever. But she has to call Marcello to come back because the father is ill, and just kind of sitting there in a chair with his back to his son, not facing his son, as if he's almost ashamed to allow his son to see him this way, as in hanging out nightclubs, hanging out with girls, and maybe on an after reflection, he doesn't want his son to perceive him like that. So you almost get the sense that he has his back to him because he's ashamed, or maybe he's just cutting him out.
Whose idea was it to go to the cabaret?
It was the father's.
It was the father's idea.
He wanted to go out to a club. He wanted to get the champagne.
Yeah.
He wanted to do all those things. He wanted to go home with the girl, but he recovers from his heart attack. And poor Marcello is just like, stay, spend more time with me, almost begging him. And he's like, I got to go. And he just goes off on the taxi. And they have a really beautiful shot in that particular scene of overhead of him putting his father in a taxi. And it's just, you get a real sense of sadness.
That's a nice shot.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful shot.
Okay. So now we're on to the next sequence. This is when he meets a bunch of people that he winds up going to a party with. And he runs into our friend Madalena again in this particular sequence. It's sort of all these people that he's associating with are a bunch of they're either wealthy aristocrat type people or he's associating with showgirls. Those are like the two kinds of people he's associating with in this film.
Except for Emma.
Well, yeah, I'm not counting her because I'm counting the party scenes where he...
Right. Oh, yeah, because it's his job. His job is to report on the movie business and stardom and all of those things. I mean, that's what he does for a living. So that's why he's running up on sort of so much debauchery. Yeah. So much of it.
Yeah. In this particular scene, they're going to go look at this old ruins because they think there's going to be a ghost there. There's a lot of really strange people again in this particular scene. He's really good at having all these really odd people in the scenes, these odd characters. And Madalena, she gets him in this room and she's talking to him through this fountain.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
Trying to get him to admit his love for her, right? Which he does. But then she just can't accept it, or she doesn't want to listen to it. And she starts getting involved with this other man that's just sitting there with her at the fountain. So
yeah. There's a lot of that kind of play going on throughout the film where there's redefining the nature of relationships and what is an intimate relationship. And she's professing her love to one man. And in the meantime, she's having,
Yeah.
with another man
Yeah.
at the very same time, which is a debauchery. I'm not judging anybody on that.
Yeah.
I'm not going on that to judge them, but I would say that at the time, in the context of that film, you could see how it would win awards and also offend the Catholic Church to no end.
Yeah, there's a lot of very strange group scenes that have an orgy type feel to them. This lady, Jane, she winds up during the seance coming and taking his hand and leading him away. And here's another one of these things where we don't know what really happened. That
Right.
anything happened and nothing happened, we don't know. Because it doesn't.
And I mean, we can't assume, but it's up to you.
Yeah.
It's more of a judgment on the viewer.
I really like when they're returning back to wherever they came from originally. And I really like that sort of hedge where they're walking up the stairs. That's a very beautiful shot. And I also like the way they walk like they're in a procession.
Right.
I thought that was really interesting as well.
There's
and,
a lot of beautiful things in the film.
Yeah, there's a lot of beautiful shots.
Beautiful shots.
Yeah, Fellini's known for his beautiful
actors,
shots.
Beautiful.
And then we go
people.
back to Emma and Marcello. This is the next sequence. They're just sitting on an isolated road. And what I find really strange about what is this scene about? Because why is there a big light fixture there when they're just in this isolated road? I was confused by that.
Yeah.
What did that mean?
Who knows? I mean, this is when he has the fight with
They have
her.
a humongous fight. He
fight.
kicks her out of the car.
And this is moment of enlightenment for him, maybe.
Maybe.
So maybe this is why we're having the big light.
Yeah, but it's like a big like set light almost. It's almost like the set lights were in there and somehow got into the shot. It's
there's some.
I'm not understanding that. It's very
some
odd.
Of the frames.
But anyhow, there's a big set light there.
So what'd you think of that fight?
Yeah, the fight is very dramatic. And it's the first time we see Marcello show any kind of real emotion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like suddenly
Other
something
than
matters.
shrugging and kind of like
always shrugging.
bearing witness and bad behavior. This is a moment of anger and
yeah, he
hostility.
actually shows some passion of some sort.
And I think for younger men, even in contemporary society, what he relates in that fight with her is pretty much, I think, the way young men particularly, feel about settling down.
Yeah.
That's not what he wants.
No.
He doesn't want cooking. He doesn't want a family. He doesn't want to become a spineless worm.
He does and he doesn't, because remember, he wants to be like Steiner, too. He wants to have the family like Steiner.
But Steiner's not like your ordinary family man.
But in a way, he does want it, but in a way, he doesn't necessarily want it with Emma. But then he also doesn't want to leave Emma, because as we see, he drives away from her, leaves her stranded on the road, which is really rude, by the way. And then the next thing you know, it's a little bit later, he comes back and gets her and takes her back home. And they go home and they apparently have actually been intimate, because you see them together in bed.
They're back in bed.
That's the only people you ever see together in bed.
And do you know, though, that scene, it's so great because relationships can be fraught and they can really get angry. Actually, in a healthy relationship, you have to be able to drop an F-bomb.
Mm-hmm.
You have to. You have to be able to say, no, you're effed up. You can't do that. I'm out. You have to be able to let steam off. But in a healthy relationship, you do turn around, get it together, and dust yourself off and say, got to move on. But his relationship's not that healthy. But I was kind of glad to see they put that in there.
Yeah.
I think it's abusive. I think he was definitely being abusive.
Well, he hit her.
Yeah. Physically abusive, but also, too, mentally abusive and those kind of things. But you have to also think about reality and where that plays out in relationships. I mean, you certainly, if someone's violent, you got to go. You got to get away from it. That would have been the end of the relationship today because people know better. But to voice you're upset, you're angry, all of that stuff, well, that's okay. But, when it went to the violent, but that's what people did in that period, which is really sad in a way.
It is. But the worst thing is going to come is that when they're all happily back together in bed, they get a phone call and what has happened.
Yeah. Where does he have to go somewhere?
He has to go to Steiner's house.
Oh, yeah. He goes to Steiner's house. Because Steiner's been shot. Was he shot or did he shoot himself?
Steiner shot himself and his two children.
He did. That's right. Yeah.
He killed his children and then he shot himself. So all of a sudden now this illusion that he's been believing, this great ideal, has just been shattered in front of his eyes.
Okay. Well, from that point on, it's not a Hollywood ending, but at that point, Marcello should say, wow, what I wanted, it's not that great.
Right, exactly.
And maybe I should make the most of what I'm doing.
Right.
And have fun. But as we know, that's not the case.
That doesn't happen. But the one thing that I thought was very significant about this particular scene, besides Well, first of all, the thing I find very strange is that they just allowed him to go up. Yeah, sure. Right in the middle of the police investigation. Go ahead up into the apartment. Yeah, no problem. But
And based on the fact that he was just a good friend.
yeah, just go ahead on up.
Just a
No
good friend.
problem. Just stand in the crime scene. No big deal. But anyhow, he's standing there observing. And of course, he's devastated. He's not really showing this extremely, but he's devastated. And in the meantime, as this is happening, there's all this technical talk that we're measuring this far away, the bullet
Right, the
landed here.
bullet
Yeah,
landed
it's very
here.
interesting. The emotional and the technical together. And then he has to go with the police to give the news to Steiner's wife.
Right.
And this scene, because the paparazzi swarm this poor woman, and it's just horrible. Where the paparazzi were annoying before, now it's just, that's wrong.
Yeah,
It honestly reminds me a lot of Princess Diana for
Yeah.
some reason.
That's the point of that whole scene is at what point does it get out of hand? And it's out of hand at
Yeah.
that point. And they often do get out of hand with celebrities.
Yeah, tragedy has no privacy.
No. And so did he kill his kids?
Yes.
He did. Well,
He
why,
shot them.
Why when they finally caught up with her, the one guy said they're injured?
He said they were hurt, but
They were
I think
hurt.
it's because he didn't want to say what had happened in front of the paparazzi.
Okay,
I think he
okay,
was trying to
okay.
just get her to get in
Right,
the car.
okay,
He
yeah.
didn't want her to,
Because that kind of threw me off a little bit.
Yeah, no. There's one point when Marcello goes into the room and sees the children's bodies on the beds. Yeah,
That's, I remember
it's
that
pretty
now.
disturbing.
Yeah.
We only have one more episode and the epilogue. So I don't want to say what happens because we try not to spoil, although it's hard to spoil this particular film. But
Yeah.
I think it's nice to experience the ending yourself without being told what happens. Because Fellini's endings are always so ambiguous. It can mean many different things to many different people. I mean, I know what I think it means.
Well,
but
what do you think it means? You're
just-
not going to give anything away.
I think he has an opportunity to go with good and purity, and he just shrugs his shoulders and continues with his life.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Because she does the thing
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
typing
Yeah.
in the end. And,
Yeah.
and it's the last shot. Goodbye. You had
Yeah.
a chance.
Yeah,
See ya.
exactly.
And so he's
he's
not going to
Yep,
change.
nope, he stays
Yeah.
the same.
And one of the things that, like I mentioned, the camera movement and things that Orson Welles did. And then so you can free up this stuff with metaphors and psychological portrayals on film with Fellini. And then that carries all the way on through. And in the modern film world, if you see a Wes Anderson film, you're looking at Fellini. Fellini's all over it now when you see it and how he uses imagery to push out the psychological aspect of the film.
Yeah.
And then there's one other director in between, and it's Alex Tarkovsky, who does all of this imagery, and it's all psychological. It's like if you imagine Fellini on steroids. And one other thing I would say about this film, which is amazing how today it's more relevant than ever, from the fact that because of social media, you have people wanting to be celebrities, and it's a bunch of just insanity online, people posing, taking photographs. And that's what this film shows in 1960. It's the same thing. So I think it's really, really relevant today. But if anybody is interested in film, you got to see it just because it's part of a lineage of important films to get you to where we are today and what we see today in film, not necessarily in action films or whatever is popular, not popular films, just in film. That's what we see in film today.
Yeah.
It's one of the important cornerstones or building blocks of that. So, yeah.
And this film was his big transition into the American market. This film sort of jettisoned him into the American market. So this was a very important film for him. It did so for Marcello Mastroianni as well.
All three of them were on stage at the Academy Awards, and they all got honorable awards at the same Oscar event. They were in their 60s and 70s.
You mean when he got his honorary?
Yeah, when he got his
I think that was in 1993.
Yeah, when he got his honorary. So did Marcello,
did he?
and so did Sophia Loren.
Oh, did they?
So they all three got awards, and the other two may not have, but they were on stage all three together, and it was quite a moment.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's when Fellini said, "People say my movies are surreal. Life is surreal." That's what his quote was.
Yeah.
Marcello Mastroianni. Now, there's a great actor he's an architect, trained architect.
Yeah.
So he just stumbles into acting, and he's very good. And I've seen some of his films that are...
He's an 8.5 also.
Yeah, he worked
which
well
is another
with
Fellini
film.
film.
He's done some other things, and
He was really well suited for this particular character. He kind of gave a sort of new leading man as well, kind of this
He did.
non-caring.
And they mentioned Gregory Peck in the Dolce Vita.
Yeah, they
By
do.
name.
I don't.
And I can't
They
remember
mentioned
where it
Paul
was.
Newman also.
All the time.
They mentioned Paul Newman. They
Like
mentioned
3
John
times.
Barrymore.
Yeah,
They
that's
mentioned
pretty cool.
many old actors.
And that's what we see is the window dressing on this film.
Yeah.
Because they don't want neo-realism anymore. And especially the rock band and all of those things that are so American. And it wins the Palme d'Or in France. And the French are very particular about film.
Yes, they certainly are. They certainly are. So here on Silver Screen Time Machine, we do our star ratings. So of 1 to 5, what would you give this film?
I would give it a 5. But if you would ask me that 30 years ago, I would have given it a 1.
What? No.
Because 30 years ago, when I saw this film, I couldn't get through it.
It is long. That is one thing.
It
is
long.
a long film.
Just the notion that it wasn't a straight narrative.
Yeah.
To understand all of those things and the depth of this film. Now, when I see it, I give it a 5 only because the conflict that goes on for humans in general, it's so apparent in the film.
Yeah.
Psychologically, the portrayals of these inner workings of what it means to be alive and do you do this, do you do that? Devil on one shoulder, an angel on another. And it becomes real. And that's kind of his quote. You're saying it's surreal, but it's real. So I give it a 5 today. I would have given it a 1 when I was,
That would be
years
wrong.
ago.
But this is probably not the Fellini film to start out with. If you've never seen Fellini, I would recommend a more sort of starter film like La Strada that has a little bit more of a regular kind of narrative, and then transition yourself into this particular film. I give it a 4 just because it's not my favorite Fellini film. Fellini gets a little long in some scenes and it kind of drags slightly. My personal favorite Fellini film is Nights of Cabiria. I absolutely love that film.
A lot of people like
That's a
8.5.
fantastic. I don't really like 8.5.
And that's the next one after this one.
I liked his earlier stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like I like his earlier stuff a little better than his latest stuff, but this is still a fantastic film. The black and white is gorgeous. The score is very beautiful. The acting, excellent. It's a really interesting film. You have to probably watch it more than once to really catch on to all the things they're trying to say.
And I would say that anytime you watch at least this film, you probably want to keep an open mind and do some abstract deconstruction of what you're seeing symbolically. And you'll see a lot of different things in the film, which is great.
Yeah, see it more than once.
Fellini didn't just take the easy way out and commit straight up murder on screen so that people go, ooh.
Yeah.
No, it's not like that.
Yeah, and it's more abstract. But we should probably wrap up because we're getting a little long. I want to thank you, Carl, for being my guest and for picking such a delightful film to watch.
Hey, it was a lot of fun. I was glad to talk to you about it.
Good. So
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So for Silver Screen Time Machine, this is Wendy saying goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast today. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And please leave us a comment or a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Intro and outro music composed by Heidi Engel. Artwork by Tyler Birch. Produced and edited by Wendy Whittick. Recorded at PCTV Studios, Pittsburgh, PA. See you next time.